Hey everybody. So tonight, I'm sorry, the screen is acting a little, just trying to get it in the recording there. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is legitimacy. We have a legitimacy essay that you're going to be writing. So I want to take this opportunity to talk to you and let you know uh, what legitimacy in government is about. Um, and so I have lost connection. I'm recording this on my Camtasia, which is the reason why I can still record. I'm going to give it just a minute to reconnect. Okay, we're back. All right, so talking about, excuse me, legitimacy. So when we think about questions like who has political power, who has the authority to rule, it's important to understand that different countries answer these questions in different ways, but they all answer them in one way or another. It's almost like a riddle, isn't it? So countries that have no clear answers often suffer from a lack of political legitimacy or the right to rule as determined by their own citizens. So legitimacy may be secured in a number of ways using sources such as social compacts, constitutions, ideologies. According to philosopher Max Weber, legitimacy may be categorized into three basic forms. The first being traditional. Traditional legitimacy rests upon the belief that tradition should determine who should rule and how. For example, if a particular family has had power for hundreds of years, the current ruling members of that family are legitimate rulers because it has always been so. Traditional legitimacy often involves important myths and legends, such as the idea that an ancestor was actually born a god or performed some fantastic feat, like pulling a sword out of a stone. Rituals and ceremonies all help reinforce the traditional legitimacy. Most monarchies are based on traditional legitimacy, and their authority is symbolized through crowns, thrones, scepters, and or robes of a particular color or design. Traditional legitimacy may also be shaped by religion, so that political practices remind people of deep-seated ancient beliefs. For example, the Inca believed that their chief ruler, called the Inca, was a deity descended from the sun, and his status as god king was reflected in his elaborate dress with fine textiles woven just for him. Although the belief in a god ruler is not generally accepted in the modern world, many leaders in the Middle East today base their authority on their ability to interpret Sharia or traditional religious law. The next is charismatic legitimacy, which is based on the dynamic personality of an individual leader or a small group. Charisma is an almost indefinable set of qualities that make people want to follow a leader, sometimes to the point that they are willing to give their lives for him or her. For example, Napoleon Bonaparte was a charismatic leader who rose in France during the time when traditional legitimacy of the monarchy had been challenged. By force of personality and military talent, Napoleon seized control of France and very nearly conquered most of Europe. However, Napoleon also represents the vulnerability of charismatic legitimacy. Once he was defeated, his legitimacy dissolved, and the nation was thrown back into chaos. Charismatic legitimacy is notoriously short-lived because it's usually does not survive its founder. The next is considered rational legal legitimacy. So this is based neither on tradition nor on the force of a single personality, but rather a system of well-established laws and procedures. This type of legitimacy then is highly institutionalized or anchored by strong institutions such as legislatures, executives, and or judiciaries that carry over through generations of individual leaders. People obey leaders because they believe in the rules that brought them into office, and because they accept the concept of continuous state that binds them together as a nation. Rational legal legitimacy is often based on the acceptance of the rule of law that supersedes the actions and statements of individual rulers. The rule may take two forms. We have common law, based on tradition and practice, past practices, and legal precedents set by the courts through interpretation of statutes, legal and legal legislations, and past rulings. And then we have code law, based on a comprehensive system of written rules or codes of law divided into commercial, civil, and criminal codes. Common law is English in origin and is found in Britain, the United States, and other countries with a strong English influence. Code law is predominant in Europe and countries influenced by the French, German, and Spanish systems. Countries in comparative government course that have code law are China, Mexico, and Russia. So most modern states today are based on a rational legal legitimacy, although it does not mean that traditional and charismatic legitimacy are not still important. Instead, they tend to exist within the rules of traditional legal legitimacy. For example, charismatic leaders such as Martin Luther King still may capture the imagination of the public and have tremendous impact on political, social, and economic developments. Likewise, modern democracies such as Britain and Norway still maintain the traditional legitimacy of monarchies to add stability and credibility to their political systems. Many factors contribute to the legitimacy in the modern state. In a democracy, the legitimacy of leaders is based on fair, competitive elections, open political participation by citizens. As a result, if the electoral process is compromised, the legitimacy of leadership is likely to be questioned as well. For example, the controversial counting of votes in Florida in the U.S. presidential election of 2000 was a crisis for the country, largely because the basic fairness of the electoral process, an important source of legitimacy, was questioned. Factors that encourage legitimacy in both democratic and authoritarian regimes are, and I'm going to switch my slide to show you these. Here are the factors that encourage legitimacy. First being economic well-being. Citizens tend to credit their government with economic prosperity, and they often blame their government for economic hardship. So political legitimacy is reinforced by economic well-being. Historic tradition, longevity. If a government has been in place for a long time, citizens in other countries are more likely to view it as legitimate. Charismatic leadership. Max Weber says charisma is a powerful factor in establishing legitimacy, whether the country is democratic or totalitarian. Nationalism, shared political culture. If citizens identify strongly with their nation, not just the state, they are usually more accepting of legitimacy of the government. Satisfaction with the government's performance and responsiveness looks at chances are that the government is a legitimate one if citizens receive benefits from the government, if the government wins wars, or if citizens are protected from violence and crime. So let's talk about political culture and political ideologies. Historical evolution of political tradition shapes a country's concept of who has the authority to rule and its definition of legitimate political power. This evolution may be gradual or forced, long or relatively brief. And the relative importance of tradition varies from country to country. Political culture refers to the collection of political, sorry about that. Hold on one second. We're fine there. Political culture refers to the collection of political beliefs, values, practices, institutions that the government is based on. For example, if a society values individualism, the government will generally reflect this value in the way that it is structured and in the way that it operates. If the government does not reflect basic political values of a people, it will have difficulty remaining viable. Political culture can be analyzed in terms of social capital, or the amount of reciprocity and trust that exists among citizens and between citizens and the state. Societies with low amounts of social capital may be more inclined toward an authoritarian and anti-individual governments, and societies with more social capital may be inclined toward democracy. Some argue that Islam and or Confucianism are incompatible with democracy because they emphasize subservience and respect for differing statuses in life. Social capital, then, is not valued. Critics of social capital theory say that it relies too heavily on stereotypes and that it ignores the fact that democracy has flourished in traditional societies, such as India, South Africa, and Turkey. So, what are the different types of political culture? So, the number and depths of disagreements among citizens within a society. I apologize, my dog is barking. Hold on, let me close my door here. So the disagreements among citizens within a society form the basis of dividing political cultures into two types, consensual and conflictual. So the consensual political culture among citizens may disagree on some political processes and policies. They tend to generally agree on how decisions are made, what issues should be addressed, and how problems should be solved. For example, citizens agree on that the election should be held to select leaders, and they accept the election winners and their leaders. Once the leaders take charge, the problems they address are considered by most people to be appropriate for government to handle. And by and large, consensual political culture accepts both legitimacy of the regime and solutions to major problems. On the other hand, conflictual political culture, citizens in this type are sharply divided, often on both legitimacy of the regime and solutions to major problems. For example, if citizens disagree on something as basic as capitalism versus communism, the conflict almost certainly will be difficult to avoid. Or if religious differences are so pronounced that followers of one religion do not accept an elected leader from another religion, these differences strike at the heart of legitimacy and threaten to topple the regime. When a country is deeply divided in political beliefs and values over a long period of time, political subcultures may develop, and the divisions become so embedded that the government finds it difficult to rule effectively. No matter how we categorize political cultures, they are constantly changing, so that over time conflictual political cultures may become consensual and vice versa. However, political values and beliefs tend to endure, and no political system may be analyzed accurately without taking into consideration the political culture that has shaped it. So when the Russian president dictates a major change of policy, the Chinese government enforces economic development of rural lands, the British prime minister endures another round of decision, or Mexican citizens take a liking to a leftist leader, you may be sure that the political culture is a force behind these stories in the news. Well, let's talk about different political ideologies. So political culture also shapes the political ideologies that a nation's citizens hold. Political ideologies are sets of political values held by individuals regarding the basic goals of government and politics. Examples of political ideologies are liberalism, places emphasis on the individual, political and economic freedom. Do not confuse liberalism as an ideology with its stereotype within the U.S. political system. A broad ideology, liberalism is part of the political culture of many modern U.S. democracies, including the United States. Liberals seek to maximize freedom for all people, including speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association. Liberals also believe that citizens have the right to disagree with state decisions and to act to change these decisions of their leaders. For example, in recent years, many U.S. citizens openly expressed their disagreements with the Bush administration concerning war in Iraq and in homeland security issues. The U.S. political culture supports the belief that government leaders should even listen to such criticisms. Political opinion generally has some political impact in the liberal democracies such as U.S. and Britain. Communism is our next ideology. In contrast to liberalism, generally values the equality over freedom. Whereas liberal democracies value the ideal of equal opportunity, they usually tolerate a great deal of inequality, especially with the economy. Communism rejects the idea that personal freedom will ensure prosperity for the majority. Instead, it holds an inevitable result of the competition for scarce resources is that a small group will eventually come to control both the government and the economy. For communists, liberal democracies are created by the rich to protect the rights of the property of the rich. To eliminate the inequalities and exploitation, communists advocate the takeover of all resources by the state that in turn will ensure that a true economic equality exists for the community as a whole. As a result, private ownership of property is abolished. Individual liberties must give way to the needs of society as a whole, creating what communists believe to be a true democracy. The next is socialism. Socialism shares the value of equality with communism, but it is also influenced by the liberal value of freedom. Unlike communists, socialists accept and promote private ownership and free market principles. However, in contrast to liberals, socialists believe that the state has a strong role to play in regulating the economy and providing benefits to the public in order to ensure some measure of equality. Socialism is a much stronger ideology in Europe than it is in the United States, although both socialism and liberalism have shaped these areas of the world. Next is fascism. Fascism is often confused with communism because they both devalue the idea of individual freedom. However, the similarity between the two ideologies ends there. Fascism also rejects the value of equality and accepts the idea that people and groups exist in degrees of inferiority and superiority. Fascists believe that the state has the right and the responsibility to mold the society and the economy and to eliminate obstacles, including people, that might weaken them. The powerful authoritarian state is the engine that makes superiority possible. The classic example is, of course, Nazi Germany. No strictly fascist regimes currently exist, but fascism still is an influential ideology in many parts of the world. And lastly, religion. Religions have always been an important source of group identity and continue to be in the modern world. Many advanced democracies, such as the United States, have established principles of separation of church and state, but even in those countries, religion often serves as a basis for interest groups and voluntary associations within society. Even though some European countries, such as Great Britain, have an official state religion, their societies are largely secularized, so that religious leaders are usually not the same people as political leaders. However, the British monarch is still formally the head of the Anglican Church, as well as the head of the state for the country. In our 6 countries, core countries, we will see religion playing varying different roles in all of them. From China, whose government has recently squelched the Falun Gong religious movement, to Iran, which bases its entire political system on Shia Islam. In Nigeria, religious law, Sharia, is an important basis of legitimacy in the Muslim North, but not in the Christian South. All right. So that is our presentation on legitimacy. Next week, we will probably go to maybe some of the different core countries and start doing some looks at those. But thank you for listening to this presentation on legitimacy. And remember, I'm here weekly, and so you may pop in, pop out. And please, if you have any questions or need any additional information, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for listening.